Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you in particular to Tom Tugendhat. Let's start with the most pressing question, the question on everyone's lips at this conference. Which member of your team came up with the idea for Tom Tugendhat branded fake tan, and are they getting the help they need?
Look, it would be indiscreet of me to name Boo at a moment like this. Look, I'm really proud, actually. I've got the most amazing team. I'm really lucky. I've got a fantastic bunch of young people who are demonstrating their imagination and creativity in ways that always surprise and just occasionally embarrass me, which is only healthy. And I'm really, really grateful for what they've done. They've really brought an energy to the merchandising that I hope I'm not diminishing by my actions. But they're fantastic. I'm very proud of them.
Fair enough. Let's start with, so Labour Together recently published an inquest into the election, and it was a fairly triumphalist document, as you might expect. It included a word cloud in which people were asked to name the first word that came to mind when they thought of the Conservative Party. The top answers in order were corrupt, liars, rich, useless, rubbish, bad, incompetent, untrustworthy, and blue. How do you, Tom Tugendhat, go about changing that?
So what's really tragic about this is that the reality is that after the last 12 weeks, the only word you need to change about this government is red. All the rest would apply to Starmer's administration. And that's really sad, because actually we need to rebuild trust in government more broadly. What we actually need to be doing is we need to be demonstrating that the government is here to serve the people. And frankly, the only thing that Keir Starmer seems to be interested in is self-service. And we have not seen the change that he's promised. We've simply not seen the energy that he's promised, and we haven't seen the integrity that he's promised. The reason I'm standing for the leadership of this great party is, you know, the record that you've just published in this book, whether it's Rachel Wolf's fantastic essay on turning the state or Paul Goodman's works. You know, you can see time and time again that this party works best when it remembers who it's working for. When it's working for the British people, when we put the country at the service of the people. We offer the leadership that we need and the action that actually makes the difference. And all of that depends on trust. So I'm standing because we need to restore trust in politics more broadly across this country. And Labour's failures of the last 10, 12 weeks demonstrate just how urgent it is.
So yes, just to get the plug in, this book is called the Essays on the 50th Anniversary of the CPS.
It's available from all good bookshops.
Well, it's available from right outside.
Oh, right outside. There you go.
Yeah, for $22.99. So you know, the only thing in this conference which isn't free. And it's such a good title that Tom nicked it for his campaign.
There you go. Exactly right. It's an excellent title, and I'm definitely taking it.
So on your website, the first thing which pops up is something saying CCHQ is broken, help me fix it, which is very interesting, and we'll talk about that later. The rest of it is about your values. You don't get into policy details, but you do say we need to restore the core Conservative values shared up and down the country. What would you say those values are? Well,
as a Conservative, I'd say that they start with the family, and those values are to do with trust and integrity, but they're also to do with what we do, what we deliver. To do with aspiration, to do with opportunity. And the fundamental one that underpins it all, let's be honest, is freedom. And that's why I believe in low taxes, that's why I believe in low regulation, not because I'm ideological about it, but because if you trust people, if you believe in freedom, you actually get people making better decisions for themselves. You get greater growth.
You trusted your team to make the merchandise.
Yes, I know, sometimes you get it wrong. No, sorry. No, look, I'm very proud of them. They've done much better than I would ever have done with that. So I was right to trust them, and I'm right because as a Conservative, you trust your team, you trust people to use their creativity and their imagination, and that's why taxes are a restriction on your efforts. They limit what you can do, and regulation similarly. It restricts the way you can innovate or you can have ideas because it channels you down a path. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, the world should be a free-for-all and, you know, the devil take the hindmost. And of course it doesn't. Of course you need rules. Of course you need the rule of law. But there is a difference between the rule of law, which is setting the boundaries and then holding people accountable for the actions they take, and the rule of lawyers, which is what Keir Starmer's doing, which is looking back and constraining and making everything a game of process rather than creativity. Now that second, the rule of lawyers, is what constrains. The rule of law is what liberates.
I'm indebted to David Willits for this quotation. In 1945, after a similarly apocalyptic Conservative election defeat, Quintin Hogg described it as a long pent-up and deep-seated revulsion against the principles, practices and membership of the Conservative Party. Would you accept that as a verdict on the last 14 years and where we are now, or are you more optimistic?
No, I'm much more optimistic, actually, and I think what we've seen is a very, very deep frustration around the world for every political party that was in government during COVID, for a whole series of different reasons. But together, largely because that period of transition and that period of change in our national life was so traumatic for so many people in ways that weren't always appreciated, but have seen rises in mental health issues for young people, actually for old people as well, and have seen really difficult moments of adjustment. So this has been a really difficult period for many of us, and I think the natural, therefore, rejection of government or whoever was in government is not surprising. Now, that's not to excuse us. Let's be absolutely clear that the behaviour of our party and our government over the last few years has been unacceptable. We simply cannot expect people to behave, to look at our behaviour over the last few years and to think it was appropriate. It wasn't. There were huge errors of judgment and huge moments where we did not make the right decisions. And we need to turn that around, because the truth is, this country needs the Conservative Party and we need to restore trust. The reason I say needs the Conservative Party is not because we have a right to exist. We don't have an automatic right to exist. We don't. But it's because this country needs the arguments that we champion, that you champion, to be made clear. And those rights are simple. They are the rights to freedom of to fundamental freedoms, to the ability to determine your future, to associate in a business, to build a different future for yourselves, and to champion those liberties more widely. That is the Conservative principles, and those are the ones I champion.
One of the things that you and others have said that you would do differently from the last government is on defence, and you've made an announcement today about that. But what I've asked all of the candidates who I've spoken to is, the OBR has published analysis showing that the state is going to go from taking 40% of revenue to 60% in the next 50 years. The NHS is going to double in size. Everyone is saying we are going to be a small state, low tax Conservative Party which spends more on defence. No one is saying, anything about how we face this kind of great big epochal crunch, and even something as just obvious as means testing the winter fuel payment for the richest people in society has been with a kind of howl of revulsion. Are you all just playing fantasy?
No, I think you've got to separate a few of those issues, because actually I have spoken. I gave a speech on public services a few weeks ago. In fact, I'm the only candidate who's given a speech on public services. I've also given a speech on law and order, and I've also written over a long paper on the economy, because I think you have the absolute right to know what I think about these issues, and it's not just a launch speech or a pitch to a conference that matters. It's actually a detailed understanding of the issues that drive my thinking and why it is that I believe that I'm the best person to lead this Conservative Party and, in due course, to be the Prime Minister of this great country of ours. You actually do have the right to know what I think, and I don't just mean in sound bites, I mean actually in detailed prose, and that's what I've done, that's what I've set out. And one of the things I've set out is, to your point, that if we do not reform these organisations, then they will consume, as the OBR says, up to 60% of our assets. But let's remember that the OBR always looks backwards. It's not constructive. I'm not blaming anybody, but it's not designed to interpret policies into the future. What it's designed to do is to look at growth and extrapolate forward. And that's what it does. So if we do that, you're right, that's where we'll end up. But if we make changes, that's not where we need to go. Just look at what we did in education. In education, we realised that you can either trust what Michael used to call the blob. Let's just look at it more generously and say you can either continue on the path you're on, or you can trust people. You can trust parents to choose what's best for their kids. You can trust teachers to teach and to hold the standards that they know work best, whether it's at the Michaela School run by Catherine Burville Singh, or indeed at a school like Hillview in my own community, which has made some fantastic different decisions to others. You can either do that, in which case what you do is you liberate, you empower, you see adaptations and you see changes that mean that you get ideas and innovation, you get creativity, and by the way, you also bring some costs down. or you can follow on that path. Now, when we're looking at the health service, let's be honest with ourselves. We need to be looking at that. We need to be thinking hard about the changes that we need to see and the decisions we need to make. Because at the moment, the way that we've looked at the health service, we worship the state element. We absolutely worship the bit that the government can control through civil servants, and that's the hospital element. But we largely ignore the bit that actually most people live with every day and that changes most people's lives. That's the GP sector, which is private. Most of it, almost all of it, is private health contracted to the NHS. And yet we ignore it. And the last bit, or the last two bits, is the charity sector, which provides so much of the hospice care, and of course the family, which is a fundamental element of all of our welfare. So when we look at all of that, and look at how you rebalance that, if you trust doctors to take decisions, if you trust patients to choose, if you trust nurses to be able to be empowered so that he or she can actually make the decisions better for the patient, you can actually not just bring care closer to home, which means these are remarkably uncomfortable chairs, by the way. You can not just bring care closer to home. What you can do is you can bring down cost and you can increase the effectiveness of treatment, and that's what we need to be working on.
Sure, but a member of the public looking at this conference from afar, if they've noticed it's happening at all, would think that the Tories have spent 90% of their time talking about immigration and put 90% of the blame for their defeat on immigration and 10% of the time talking about waiting lists, say.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I agree with you, and I think that the main focus of our work over the next 4 years is going to be to restore trust. And how do you restore trust? Well, you assure people that you are focused on the issues that matter to them. And I don't know about you, but we're both parents of young children. And for me, my prime concern is my kids. You know, do they have a good education? Do they have access to healthcare? Do they have a safe place to play at the weekends and in the evenings? Those are the things that matter to me. And that's where I'm really, really focused. So yes, of course immigration matters. Of course I want to make sure that we stop the votes. I want to absolutely make sure that what we're doing is we're providing a deterrent that keeps us safe and guarantees our borders. But I mostly want to make sure that my kids have a strong and safe future. I also want to make sure that my parents are safe in their old age. And that's why, to your winter fuel payment point, it's not about the means testing. It's about the fact that it was done very, very obviously and very deliberately to take money of older, vulnerable people to give it to a unionised workforce on £65,000 a year. That's not a reasonable judgment. That's just paying off your mates. That's not politics. That's pure pork barrel. What we need to see is a proper budget setting out a decent set of assumptions and cost changes and all the rest of it. And had they done that, then you can understand the trade-offs and the decisions. They didn't do that. Labour's not interested in that. They're interested in their union mates. They're not interested in you at all. So
one of the stories of the day is the remarks made by Robert Jenrick, based on an article by Ben Wallace about the ECHR preventing us from, forcing us to shoot to kill terrorists rather than imprisoning them. I mean, what is that an argument you agree with? I mean, I know you share his position on the ECHR.
He's wrong. Let me just be quite clear. He's wrong. That is, first of all, that's not what Ben Wallace said, and if you read his article, it's quite clear that's not what he said. And secondly, I'm not going to talk about Special Forces operations. As the Security Minister, I was one of the very few people who was regularly briefed on intelligence matters.
You hardly, are you in the army? You hardly ever...
Barely mention it. Barely mention it. I was lucky enough to serve alongside members of our Special Forces community in various different ways. And I should just be very clear, the idea that our Special Forces, or in fact any branch of our armed forces, whether it's Royal Air Force drone operators or whether it's troops on the ground, conduct themselves in any way other than in keeping with the values and standards of the British Armed Forces it's an extremely serious allegation. And without very specific examples, I think it would be irresponsible to do that. Now, I've heard somebody say that we couldn't have conducted an operation like that against Osama bin Laden. That's simply not true. I mean, it is just simply not true. If you present a legitimate military threat to the United Kingdom, then we have, under the laws of armed conflict today, the legal ability and, in fact, the military capability to conduct operations to keep the British people safe. I'm afraid that's simply a fact. And if you don't know it, please don't comment on military matters you know nothing about.
Sticking on the foreign policy issue, what's your take on events in Lebanon?
Look, I'm really concerned. I don't know if you know, I was a journalist. In fact, I started out as a journalist in Beirut in '97, and I worked there for 2 years. So forgive me, scribes. That's where I started, and it's really worrying. I've got a lot of friends still in Beirut, and I've got a lot of friends who I've been in touch with in recent days who are very worried. And the concern comes in two directions. First of all, let's just be clear that Lebanese Hezbollah is a vile terrorist organization sponsored by a tyrannical regime in Tehran that has murdered quite literally tens, even possibly hundreds of thousands of people. The prime victims of Lebanese Hezbollah are the Lebanese people. They have murdered thousands and thousands of Lebanese people over the last 30 years. And when I was there, admittedly nearly 30 years ago, they were conducting everything from effectively hostage-taking, hostage for ransom to raise money. They were also running illegal detention facilities. They ran an entirely separate court system, which, guess what, was entirely used to promote their terrorist violence. And they were entirely bought and paid for by the Iranian state. And the Iranian state did that in order to threaten Israel, but also, let's be clear, to keep the Sunni Muslim population and the Christian population in Lebanon under control, in inverted commas. They failed, thank God, most of the time, but that's what they were trying to do. And the Iranians then used Lebanese Hezbollah to fight aspects of the Syrian civil war on the side of Bashar al-Assad, the dictator of Syria, who murdered, again, hundreds of thousands of fellow Muslims. So
Lord Ali's best friend.
I haven't seen the evidence. I will leave you to make comments. But the reality is Lebanese Hezbollah is an absolutely vile organization that has murdered more Muslims than anybody else. It is, let's be clear, this is a deeply, deeply evil organization. But they have also fired rockets into Israel. They've fired rockets at nurseries and at schools and at hospitals, and very sadly, they've killed civilians across Israel. And I'd just like to ask you, Rob, do you think that if we had rockets coming into Birmingham, not every day, but just every now and again, that occasionally hit a school or a hospital or a nursery that killed civilians, do you think we'd do nothing? Do you think we'd say, oh, well, it's abroad, we can't do anything? No, we wouldn't. And by the way, the law of armed conflict, the law that applies to British forces, says that if we are being threatened, we can respond. And by the way, the United Nations also says the same. You have the absolute right to self-defense. And the Israelis are exercising that right. Now, I'm not going to comment on the military operation. Forgive me, I don't know the details of it. And I've been in far too many military operations already. So I know that the complexity that goes into planning them is not the same as the complexity that is always reflected in the media after them. And so I'm not willing to judge what is and what isn't a legitimate target from what I see on TV or see reported. That's something that would require a lot more investigation to know.
Switching topics, a group of brilliant writers, including a brilliant writer from the Centre for Policy Studies, recently published an essay called Foundations, which argues that the core economic problem in our country is that we essentially don't build anything, not just houses, but power stations, roads, railways, that we have let the fabric of our nation decay. We have made it far too hard to build anything, to invest in the country's future. You have, not only you, but you have been one of those who's picked up those arguments. Mainly me. How would that be reflected in your agenda as Conservative leader?
Well, many years ago, when you were a purer soul than you are now, and you used to write for the Telegraph, you made many of these arguments yourself, and you would have seen. I wrote about this in the Sunday Telegraph. When was it? About 10 days ago, a bit more than that. Because the truth is that they're right. They're absolutely right that the...
I don't think I'm underwriting about these issues like now. I think I've been fairly consistent for 15 years.
It's fair. But I'm making a point about the Telegraph because they had the good grace to publish my piece and the Times didn't. So there you go. It's entirely...
I apologise.
It's entirely biased. Sorry, I do apologise.
The Daily Paper, what can I say?
Yeah, exactly, quite right. Look, the in-house journal. The reality is what the guys were writing about, and I spoke to Sam Bowman about this, actually, and there's a long interview that we did together on YouTube, which you can download very easily, is talks about these subjects, because the truth is, if you want to do levelling up, if you want to do intergenerational fairness, if you want to see wealth more equally distributed, you actually need to build connections between people. And the truth is that the reason you get greater equality in urban areas is because it is easier to transfer across, by which I mean to change jobs, to engage with different people, to have ideas and so on. So density in two senses, density in the sense of building together, but also density in the sense of connections in terms of transport infrastructure is incredibly important. And the third of which, of course, is housing. And one of the points actually they made in that paper was that France, which has a similar, slightly smaller population than the United Kingdom, has about 7 million more homes than the United Kingdom. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but over a housing population, I think it's 30 million in the UK and 37 million in France. That's a huge difference. And that means that people find it easier to move for work. They find it easier to, therefore, take a higher paid job, and therefore they find it easier to have that opportunity that is not so easy to achieve in the UK. And let's be clear, you know, we both know, well, I certainly know people in the UK, in my community, who find it very difficult. They get up in the morning, they do the right thing, and they work hard. But the reason they don't take the earlier job is because they have childcare responsibilities, or because the earlier job starts in 4 in the morning and you can't get a bus at 4 in the morning. And so these restrictions actually hold people back. Now, there are some really good companies that are doing some impressive work in helping social mobility, because aspiration and social mobility is not just for the government. In fact, it's not especially for the government, it's for all of us. A company like Greggs, which supports people to take chances, demonstrates that the North East is still the engine room of ideas for industry and change, and a really important part of the United Kingdom.
Do you, I mean, one thing, I mean, look, at the moment Labour's housing targets came out, removing the urban uplift, I said, that, well, they've just got the Tories off the hook on housing, because every Tory leadership candidate and every Tory is going to immediately coalesce around, yes, we need to build loads more houses, but we will build them where the price signals are strongest, i.e. in London and the South East,
Correct.
Whereby, wonderful coincidence, we don't have any MPs left.
Well, it's not only that, actually, although that's, forgive me, that's a narrow political point. It's beneath you, Robert, it's beneath you. But the truth is that Sadiq Khan has completely failed. I mean, he's objectively and abjectly failed.
In fact, thanks to my arguments, he was censored by the official UK statistics agency for misleading the nation about his house-building record.
Indeed, and you called him out, and you managed to raise awareness of that. So, thank you. That was a good public service. Because the truth is that most people want to live in areas where there are opportunities and where they can, live near friends, family, and jobs and restaurants and whatever else. And that's where, that's why people want to live in London. It's not really a surprise that people like the population density of London. It grants them that opportunity to explore their ideas and to grow themselves as people. And that's why we need to champion that density of accommodation in London. But that's also why, what Labour is setting out is absolute cobblers. What they're talking about is ignoring local communities and just bulldozing fields, rather than actually building homes where people want to live, increasing density. Now, we've seen this even in sort of less urban areas, in towns like Tunbridge, where we've seen greater densification because the council is well-led, well-run, and understands that you have a need. It
wouldn't be a Tory council.
It's funny you should mention it, actually. It's run by a fantastic councillor called Matthew Borton, who is one of the best county and local government leaders in the United Kingdom. There you go, by chance.
So I think lots of people are going to have questions, so I'm going to just ask two more. We had James Cleverly on this stage yesterday, and he essentially made the case that, as John Gordon Brown once said, this is no time for a novice. He's had the great offices of state. He's been on Question Time more than the rest of you put together. Bless the others, but they just don't have the experience to lead the country. And in your case, you've attended cabinet. You haven't actually. And you've held very important jobs, but you haven't been at the top table. What would your response to that be?
Well, look, I'm not going to hold his record against him, and that's for you to do, and for journalists to reflect on what his successes and failures may be. I'm here to stand on my own record, and my own record is of defending Britain's interest, of planning and leading operations, and making sure that we are safe around the world. It's also, by the way, of seeing a different vision of the United Kingdom, because if you think, which I know you don't, but if you think that leadership is about management, about managing a department, I'm afraid you haven't understood. If you think leadership is about supporting the work of civil servants and making sure it's correctly executed, I'm afraid you haven't understood. Leadership is about changing this country. It's about delivering the change that we need to see. It's about inspiring and giving that opportunity to thousands, in fact millions across the United Kingdom, and making sure we have a Britain that works for everyone. Now, James is a great guy and I love him dearly, and it's the argument I would expect him to make. I would argue this is no time for a novice. What you need is a leader proven on operations, proven in Westminster and proven in Cabinet.
Fair enough. And the last question from me, going back to what we talked about earlier, as I said, the first thing on your website is that we need to fix CCHQ. And when Robert Jenrick sat on this stage, the biggest applause line he got was when he promised that he would never impose candidates on associations from the centre again. Is that a promise that you would match?
I'll make a different promise. I'll make the promise that I'll make sure you can choose early, and choose as early as possible, because it's absolutely up to associations across the United Kingdom to choose their own candidates. But you can only achieve that, no matter what he says, the only way you achieve that is by selecting early. Otherwise, you end up in by-election rules because you selected late. So let me be pragmatic about it. Do it early, do it now, and then you'll be free to choose.
Okay, let's open it up to questions from the floor. Emma, you have, following Tom's magnificent example, you have the freedom to make your own decisions.
Indeed, there you go. Trust your team, Rob. Trust your team. You might end up with a tattoo.
I will never end up with a tattoo.
You say that now, the night is young.
If I did end up with a tattoo.
If you see him at the Spectator party tonight, I'm just saying, you know where my tats are.
Right.
I'll follow that. Lucy Hare from the Higher Education Policy Institute. Would you cap international student numbers?
What I would do is I would uncap apprenticeships. Because actually the real challenge that we've got is we've got too many people who don't see the opportunity that apprenticeships really bring. And so we've got young people who could have an opportunity that works for them. Let me be frank. I did go to university, but looking back, I should have gone straight into the armed forces first off. And that would have been an apprenticeship. It wouldn't have been called that, by the way, but that's what it is. If you join the army at 18 and you commission at 18, effectively, that first year of training is an apprenticeship. It's called a commissioning course, but that's basically what it is. And what it would have given me is a greater grounding and an ability to understand more about my country, my culture, and who we are. Whether I'd have gone to university later, I suspect I might have done. But having a different start in life, having that choice about a start in life is incredibly important. Where I would be very cautious, and let me be absolutely clear about it, we have seen a pernicious growth of Chinese influence in our universities because the state control over Chinese students is really, really serious. And now I have been committed to closing the Confucius Institutes, thank you, the Confucius Institutes, because I think what they're doing is they are opening up a vehicle for undermining freedom of speech in the United Kingdom. We've already seen professors having their freedoms shut down because of protests by various Chinese student groups, sponsored by, encouraged by, in some cases, actually forced by the Chinese state through different state agents in the United Kingdom and indeed back in China. We need to make sure that we are protecting freedom of speech in our country, and that means standing up against the evil and pernicious influence of the CCP.
Hi. You talked about restoring trust, and a lot of candidates, you've all kind of talked about it, especially within the party, and I want some specifics from you. So what 3 things are you going to do through CCHQ, through the membership, through Westminster, to restore that trust, which I think is difficult when you're not governing?
So the first thing, this is a preamble rather than an answer of one of those 3, but have you filled in my survey online?
No, I haven't, and I should.
Please do. Right, so I've got a CCHQ survey online, but I'd be grateful for your views. So these are my views, but actually I'm interested in yours. Leadership is also about listening. One of the things the first thing that I'll do is I'll make sure that CCHQ actually works for members. You know, we've got ourselves into this bizarre situation where the most significant relationship that most people have with our party is the regular begging emails for another 20 quid. Now, that's not how you run a political party, right? You run a political party by listening to the skills, the talents, and the ideas of your members, and then looking to put them into practice. That's what we should be doing. I
think I said that if you also pledged to abolish the spam email headlines accompanying those emails, you would sweep to victory.
I think that's right. So there you go. There's pledge number 2. No, sorry. Look, pledge number 2 is to do with making sure that what we do is we hold people correctly to account. You know, I'm really sorry to say this, but we have had some extraordinarily bad behaviour by different individuals. And let me just say this. I had the great privilege of serving in various different units over many years, and many of them, because of the nature of them, were all-male units. I have never seen misogyny like I've seen in Westminster. It is genuinely extraordinary, and it's absolutely wrong. And so I'm very proud that in my campaign team, somebody pointed out to me the other day that I'm looking at the back, it's about half of our team are women. Now that's not, we didn't go out and make that so, it just so happened. And that's because I think making sure that we work and draw the talents from everybody across our whole community is incredibly important to me. We need to be open and we need to be fair. And when I see misogyny and appalling behaviour in Westminster, I know that it doesn't just undermine, it is awful for that individual, but it's not just about that individual. It actually diminishes all of us. It makes all of us poorer, and it's deeply, deeply wrong. It must end. So that's my second pledge. My third is that I will make sure that we will govern as you would expect. We will be open and transparent to even journalists like you, and we will make sure that what we're bringing in is people with ideas and talent to serve. And that's where my job as leader, one of the jobs that's often forgotten as leader, is you are the recruiting sergeant for public life. So my job will be to go up to you and say, have you thought of standing? Have you thought of standing in your local council, in the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Senedd? Have you thought of running for Parliament? Do you think you've got something to offer public life? Because I bet you do. And have you thought of standing?
Thank you. Harriet Lyne, Daily Mail. Rob read out some rather unflattering comments that members of the public have used to describe the Tory party. David Cameron went to the North Pole to detoxify it. What would you do? And secondly, I just wondered if you could flesh out some examples of misogyny you've seen in Westminster and what you'd do about it.
So I would go to the ends of the earth to detoxify the Conservative Party, because I think it is absolutely vital that our message is heard. I don't say this because it's about us. It's not about us. Conservatives are public servants. At our best, what we're doing is we're sharing the ideas and promoting the ideas that will make our country more prosperous, happier, stronger, and better. That's why I will do everything I can to make sure we detoxify the Conservative Party so that our message is heard. Not so that we're loved, but so that our message is heard, because the message is what matters. Your second question was about misogyny I've seen. It's more reports of it, and so I'm going to be slightly coy about it. And the reason I am is because these are not my stories to tell, but I have certainly heard one individual who has allowed me to talk about it told me that as a journalist, she was very seriously assaulted, in my eyes, by a politician. And when she went to see her editor in the lobby about it, he told her to use it. He didn't say, this is wrong. He didn't say, you should call the police. He didn't say, I will support you. He said, you should use it. That's misogyny. And I'm afraid Westminster isn't just politicians. We all know, sadly, that there are others, many others, who are active in Westminster. And I'm afraid it is completely unacceptable. And I've been extremely clear to my team when I heard about this, that if one of my team experiences misogyny, sexist behaviour, or even worse, assault, then they should never think about who it is that did it. Never consider that they may be important to my career or senior or anything like that. I will support them, because it is absolutely wrong that it should happen, and I will always stand with those who have been wronged by it.
Hello, David Lynch from the Press Association.
Nice to see you, David.
Thank you. You've spoken a lot during this conference about connectivity across the union, building more infrastructure, building more things in general. Do you have any view about whether the northern leg of HS2 should be revived?
Look, I love the idea of a high-speed train from London to Glasgow, but let's be honest, we're not going to achieve it unless we change some of the things that the Foundations document was talking about. Let's not forget that on the HS2 link, there was not only the most extraordinary tunnel projects that were ramping up the costs. But in some parts we were looking for newts that had never existed. We were looking to protect wildlife that had been brownfield or indeed urban for many, many decades. And we'd effectively gold-plated every cost and every rule. We need to change... Sorry, go on.
No, but the tunnelling was happening because of your parliamentary colleagues who said you can't possibly devastate my beautiful, picturesque constituency by having a small railway line running through it.
Well, it was partly that, Robert. It was partly that. You're right, that was the driver. But the cost of the tunnelling was added to because we were looking, in some places, we were looking for earthquakes that had never happened. We were looking for seismic activity that had simply not been seen in those areas. So you're right that was the initiative. But the multiplication of cost was not because of that, it was because of other gold plating regulations. And so looking at how we connect Britain is, I think, vital. Look, it simply can't be right that most people and most goods are transported on infrastructure that was built 150 years ago by our Victorian ancestors. You know, we should be investing today, and HS2 isn't about speed, it's about capacity. We need greater capacity on our railways. We need to have the opportunity to carry goods around this country. And if we're serious about climate change, if we're serious about net zero, if we're serious about environmental policies, we need to be building railways. Beaching was wrong. We need to go back on that. And what we need to be doing is making that possible. And the only way to make that possible is to look at the regulations and make sure they actually work for this country. And that's why I'm so serious about really looking at what levelling up and building means, so that we're delivering the infrastructure and the unionism that connects people across our country together. A room full of train spotters, my people.
Hiya, Tom. I'm from Northern Ireland, and so the union is the most important issue to me politically. I'm very glad you mentioned it just now. I
mention it a lot.
You do, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm just curious, how will your government show its commitment to the union with Northern Ireland and the other home nations?
So let me just start off by saying one of my best friends... Did I ever tell you I was in the army? No. One of my best friends from my time in Helmand in, I think it was 06, it might have been 07, but around then, was a former sergeant major, ended up as a captain, who's now leading a party called the Ulster Unionist Party, Doug Beattie. He and I served together, and he's much braver than me. He got a military cross, and he's a great, great guy. He's a very close friend. And for me, Northern Ireland is not a foreign country. It's where I've been many, 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 many times. You know, I go and speak at events in Northern Ireland. I have many strong friendships with people in Northern Ireland. It's my country just as much as part of any other part of the United Kingdom is my country. Obviously, I mean, the best part is the independent sovereign kingdom of Kent. But, you know, all the other areas are also important to me. And look, tying the UK together is incredibly important. That's why looking at ways in which we build those connections is fundamental. But it also demands of us a good relationship with Dublin. Because we know that in order to make the union work, in order to make the relationship across the whole of the UK work, we need to respect the fact that there are differences within the United Kingdom. You know, Scotland has a different legal system. Northern Ireland has a different civil service and legal system. It also has an electricity system that is linked in to the island of Ireland and not just into the United Kingdom. The health care, as you know, if you're in Dundalk, you may get rushed over the border in order to get heart treatment. And if you're in Mayo, you may get rushed the other side. You know, the truth is that the NHS, or rather the health system on the island of Ireland, is fully integrated. And so we need to respect the fact that that's how people's lives are lived in Ulster. And we need to make sure that the relationship with Dublin works too. They are, after all, our only land border. I do get rather cross when people say the UK doesn't have a land border. Yes, we do. It's with the Republic of Ireland. That's exactly where it is. And people forget it all the time. So we need to respect the difference. We need to respect the nuance and the separate conditions. But I know Ulster's part of the UK like anywhere else.
Assume you're the leader of the opposition.
Future Prime Minister, yeah.
And future Prime Minister. Well, so this is the second point. You're going to the next election. What taxes do you cut, and who would be your ideal Chancellor?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not going to be giving jobs. I'm afraid that's not what I'm going to be doing.
I'm available.
Do you know, we haven't had a Chancellor from the Lords in many years. I'm just saying. I think the idea of you coming out in ermine with the red box, you know, that would say tax for the people, wouldn't it? It really would. It would. Look, do you have a coronet?
I don't.
No, well...
Would I have to get a tattoo, though?
Yeah, I mean, of course you'd have to have a tattoo. Look, I'm not going to be giving jobs, but the taxes I want to cut are those that hold back growth and opportunity. And that's why I didn't support the rise in national insurance contributions that Rishi tried to bring in, because I thought that was the wrong thing to do. First of all, it wasn't in the manifesto. Secondly, it was effectively asking you for 2.5% of your pay a year for an insurance premium of 60 grand on your social care. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous insurance premium to pay. You can pay a lot less than that for a car that moves and might crash. So, you know, this is not the way we need to be thinking about the economy. We need to be making sure that what we're doing is we're encouraging people to take risk, calculated risk, of course, but to take risk in order to seek opportunity and seek profit and growth. That's how you get innovation, that's how you get growth, and that's how you get a better society for tomorrow.
Just quickly on that, are there areas like social care where you would be willing to work with Labour?
Of course. No, look, I'm a patriot, right? I always want the British government to succeed, and I may not be a supporter of the Labour Party, I'm certainly not a supporter of the Labour Party, but I want a Labour government to succeed because I want Britain to succeed. The truth is, what I'm seeing from this Labour government is not that. What I'm seeing is avarice and greed. What I'm seeing is entirely self-service, and indeed, they are already costing us, because to your point, they're not only promising to put up taxes. We've already heard Keir Starmer saying he wants to have the state more in control. We've already heard Rachel Reeves saying effectively this is going to be a punishment beating in October. And not only is it going to hit us in October, it's already hitting us. Talk to people who are selling products and goods and services today. There's already people who are going, look, I don't know what October is going to bring, but you tell me it's going to hurt me. You tell me it's going to be worse. Guess what? I'm not going to spend today. Already there are restaurants in this country, there are holiday companies in this country, there are car firms in this country that are feeling the pinch because Labour have depressed it. You know, this is not, you know, normally you say that a leader is a dealer in hope. Keir Starmer isn't a dealer in hope, he's a dealer in despair, and he's making Britain worse for it.
Hi, Tom. Gary Carnaby from Botsford Town Council.
Hi, Gary.
Hiya. Obviously, sad news this week that Port Talbot started winding down its blast furnace.
Yeah.
Currently, Scunthorpe is the last blast furnace left. When Holly Mumby-Croft was our MP, she actively campaigned on a regular basis to keep the steelworks open. Our new MP, Nick Dakin, has gone missing. Isn't saying anything about it. There's a real chance that the blast furnaces will close before Christmas. If in opposition, that could be very difficult to do anything about. But if we are elected and you become Prime Minister, could you see a situation where we actually start making high-quality virgin steel again in the future?
Look, I've got to be honest with you, Gary. While I would do everything I can to protect virgin steel in this country, because not just because it's important for the jobs, but actually because it's a national security consideration, you need to have the ability to produce virgin steel. It is very, very hard to bring back a technology like that. The investment is huge, absolutely massive, as you know, and the erosion of knowledge that happens when a steelworks closes is very quick. As you know, you can't switch off a blast furnace. You start it and it runs until it cools, and when it cools, that's it. You need to rebuild an entire new plant. So how I would do it, I don't know, but you've got to look at the partnerships with allies you can trust, not just relying on China to sell you the virgin steel you need in order to make the ships you need to defend yourself against, oh yes, China. So you need to make sure you have that sovereign capability, and if you can't get it domestically, you need to be able to get it from trusted allies. If you can't, then I'll look at it. But I think, I'm afraid, Gary, I can't make a commitment that far out, but I understand exactly what you're saying. And just by the way, Holly did a fantastic job. Andrew Percy did an amazing job. There were many people who championed steelworks in our country. And there's many people who spoke about it too. Quite a lot of the Labour MPs talked about it too. They've gone silent now, haven't they? It's remarkable. One sniff of red leather and they've given up any sense of integrity.
Hello, my name's Charlotte Eager and I'm a journalist, but I also stood in Liverpool at the last election. And I wanted to ask you actually about how we can give back people hope, young people particularly, that they can get on in a capitalist society. Because I think this is one of the things I came across on the doorstep a lot, was not just competence, which was an issue, frankly, but really people aren't going to vote Conservative unless they think there's something in it for them. And we've got a generation of young people who can't even imagine that they're going to be able to afford to buy something or get a decent job and earn decent money. So how do we give them that hope back? Because I do think that capitalism is the way forward. It's the way. It's very. I used to live in Eastern Europe. It's incredibly important that we have some form of caring, effective capitalism as a ballast against that sort of thing.
Well, and just to add to that, in a load of other countries, Germany, France, Italy, what we're seeing is that voting for traditional centre-right or centre-left parties is becoming the exclusive preserve of the elderly. That young people are increasingly going for radical parties, whether of the right or left.
No, I think that's right. And one of the problems I think we have is the word is too often associated, misplaced. Let's be honest, what is capitalism? Capitalism is freedom. That's what it is. It's the freedom to do what you want with your assets, with your time, with your energy, and to then be able to have the freedom to do what you want with what you've achieved, you know, the profit of that energy and that effort. That's all that it is. It's nothing more complicated. It's not greed. It's not avarice. It's nothing. It's just freedom. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're explaining and converting and communicating. Because the truth is, I've heard many people say, oh, such and such isn't a conservative, or this isn't conservative, or that isn't conservative. Well, I'll tell you what conservatism is. Conservatism is believing in Britain, believing in freedom, believing in opportunity, and believing in a better future for all of us. And that's what we need to be selling. And that's why when I spoke earlier about housing and infrastructure, when I spoke about freedom and opportunity, that's what I mean. And let's not forget, Liverpool is a fantastic city. It's an amazing city. It's a city that has generated not just music and ideas and the culture and the arts, but actually enormous wealth and riches from the free associations of free people in terms of the profit of ideas and industry. And we need to be championing that and remembering that. Because the truth is, when you look at communities like Liverpool and Manchester, indeed like Tees Valley, for many years people have said these are Labour cities, these are socialist cities, that's what's in the blood of this area. Look at what Ben Houcham is achieving in Teesside and tell me that conservatism doesn't work in the industrial north. Tell me honestly that partnership between the state, understanding the role of the state, but also knowing it's not the same as society. And society is made up of business, of charity, of family. And understanding that partnership, that's what conservatism does. We connect the freedom of opportunity with the responsibility of community. That's conservatism for me.
Hi Tom, my name is Chris Reeks. I'm a City Councillor in Newport City Council in South Wales. Newport City Council is a Labour-run council. It's a heavily dominated Labour-run council, as much of the councils in Wales are. Now, not only have we got mostly Labour-run councils, we've got the Senedd, which obviously has been disastrously Labour-run for the last 25 years. And sadly, in the July elections, we lost all the MPs in Wales as well. If you were voted in as leader, how would you look to connect to the people of Wales?
So look, let me be clear. We're not hearing the voice of Conservative Wales in Westminster anymore. That's a real problem. So let me make this very clear commitment to you. I will personally, as leader, be championing Welsh issues from the opposition benches in our Parliament. Because for me, I've said it before, unionism is indivisible from conservatism. And the fact that we don't have a Welsh MP to do it, I'll do it, because it matters fundamentally to me. And I'll be holding the Labour government in Westminster and in Cardiff Bay accountable for their failures over 20 years in Cardiff Bay. The education system is appalling. The way they've run the healthcare is disastrous. What they've done to try and control communities across Wales is ridiculous. They don't actually believe in devolution. They believe in centralisation, but separatist centralisation. And if you don't believe me, just look at what they're doing with the Senedd. They're adding another 30 members of the Senedd.
£120 million of cost.
Exactly, for £120 million of cost. And by the way, we are not seeing them being held to account by the media in Wales either. I saw a report, this is really intensely irritating. I saw a report where a journalist from BBC Wales was asked, I know the question you're going to be asking, where are they going to sit? It's like, no, that's not the question I'm asking. I'm asking who's going to pay for them. We are. And for what gain? For no gain. What they're doing is they are feathering their own nests. Again, it's a classic Labour play. They all think they're union reps and that you are the employer that they've got to con. They all think that they're union reps to get one over on you. They all think that all their job is to make comfortable for themselves and to be I'm all right Jack and to let the devil take the hindmost. That's not government, that's self-service.
One of the suggestions that's been made is that the opposition shadow cabinet should be much smaller, but that people like Ben Houch and the leaders of the Scottish
That's
and Welsh
right, that's what I
Conservatives.
suggested. Yeah. No, that was exactly my plan. I'm going to definitely have members of the Senate and councillors from across the UK and members of the Scottish Parliament in our shadow cabinet, because the truth is, with 121 MPs, you're not speaking for the whole of Britain, are you? You're just not. So we need to make sure we expand that shadow cabinet to make sure we have representation from across the whole of the United Kingdom. Let's be honest, it was a real pounding that we took in July. I'm not going to lie to you, it was a real pounding. But when you take a beating like that, you've got two choices. Either you can pretend it didn't happen, you can skulk off, or you can get up proud and reinvent yourself. We need to get up proud and remember that we can be a Westminster club and irrelevant, or we can be a conservative movement and shape this country for the future.
Rance Sassock, former candidate in Newcastle Central. You touched on this a bit earlier, but before the next election, we're going to need one hell of a recruitment drive, not just parliamentary, but councillors, members, and it's going to be in places like Wales, where actually we've lost a lot of the infrastructure.
And Newcastle.
And Newcastle. And again, as you can tell, I had family from there, I wasn't a local candidate. Really, you need that. You kind of touched on this earlier, but I wonder if you could talk a bit more about what the Tom Tugendhat recruitment drive would look like.
Well, I touched on it earlier when I was asking this lady if she was interested in standing. But you have already stood, so I'd be interested in your views. But one of the things that I think we need to do is we actually need to get out there and advertise. And, you know, next year, 25, there's going to be county unitary elections and indeed several borough and district elections as well. We need to make sure we are filling those slots, not with paper candidates, but with real candidates. We need to make sure that we're attracting people to get out there and stand. And we need to be absolutely clear that what we're asking people to do is not just to stand for the Conservative Party. That's not all we're asking them to do. We're asking them to take their place on the front line of democracy. And when we see the erosion of democracy around the world, not just to the radical parties in Europe, but the actual erosion of democracy that we're seeing in many countries around the world, we need to realise that this is a fight that's on all of us. Because it's not somebody else's watch, it's your watch. It's your turn to stand on the wall and your turn to be there, ready to guard our precious freedoms. If you're not willing to do it, don't expect anybody else to. We need to be getting out there and encouraging people to take up their place.
Speaking of marketing, can I just check? I do this sometimes. Has anyone in this room ever been asked to join the Conservative Party by the Conservative Party? Okay, we're at Conservative Party conference in a room full of Conservatives, and the party has never, ever, ever marketed itself to 98% of you. It's just insane.
So one of the things I do when canvassing, actually, is if I get a C on the door, I ask, are you a member of the party? Now, I know they're not, obviously. and one of the things I follow up with was, would you like to join? And then I very often get, oh, well, I'm not quite so sure. And I say, look, it requires absolutely nothing of you. But it means that you're supporting candidates like me and other candidates. You get a choice as to who you have. And in a community like ours, where very strong Conservative representation, though sadly not in Tunbridge at the moment, where the Greens have taken the county seats, which we need to take back, just by the way. We're in a position where we need to get more people involved. So asking people to stand, asking people to join is fundamental, and that's what I'll be doing.
I once got someone buzzed and said, can I ask how you're voting? And I said, let me put it this way, I'm the chief leader writer of the Daily Telegraph. And even at that point, they didn't go, gosh, have you ever thought about this thing?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm afraid we are drawing to the end of our time, and you have to scuttle off. Was it?
I think I have to stride off.
Stride off.
Other scuttle, I stride.
But I wanted to ask one last question. James cleverly was here yesterday. Made a shameful confession that he does enjoy a game of Warhammer. and that he's sorry, but that's just who he is. What is the secret vice of yours that the electorate would be most shocked and horrified to discover?
Oh, crikey, I probably have far too many. I probably have many to mention. The one that I tell you what,
you answered what was the naughtiest thing you ever done with invading Iraq, which was kind of...
I mean, look, the one that always depresses my team, so I'm going to tell you this because it always annoys them when I say it, so good luck. It's my favourite meal, and it really is my absolute favourite meal. Look, they're already depressed. It's fish fingers, rice and peas, and I don't know why, but it is literally the best meal. And you've got to have lots of really salted butter and black pepper. It's absolutely fantastic. And the only reason to have kids, and you know this, the only reason to have kids is so you can steal fish fingers off them.
Or jam sandwiches.
Or jam sandwiches.
Delicious. Who knew?
Yeah.
On that, no. See, Tory youth policy.
Theft from children. Yes, it's mine.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to Tom for joining us. And please do stick around for, very appropriately, Boomers and Bust, Building a Conservatism for the Young. Fish fingers will not be served.